There is someone in your office, or your classroom, or your family who everyone has silently judged. They move slowly, they avoid unnecessary tasks, they always seem to find a reason not to do something the hard way. And everyone has a name for this person: lazy. But in 2005, researchers at MIT published findings on cognitive load and efficiency. Their conclusion reframed everything. The people who consistently chose lower effort paths, not out of inability, but out of deliberate mental conservation, performed measurably higher on complex reasoning tasks. Because there is a specific type of brain that has learned something most people never figure out. Effort is not intelligence. Effort is what you deploy when you haven't found the elegant solution yet. The laziest person in the room isn't avoiding work. They are refusing to perform the performance of work. There are 9 reasons this is true. 9 specific behaviors the world consistently misreads as laziness that map precisely to a rare and capable type of mind. Stay until reason 9, because that one includes a quote from the person who built the most valuable company in human history about why he specifically hired the laziest people he could find. But first, let me establish a distinction that most people never make, because there are 2 types of laziness, and only one of them is what this video is about. The first type is avoidance, fear-driven, capacity-limited, choosing not to engage because engagement feels threatening. This is real, and it has real costs. The second type is efficiency, the deliberate, calculated allocation of cognitive resources toward problems that justify the investment and away from problems that don't. From the outside, they look identical. From the inside, they feel completely different. The person avoiding is anxious. The person conserving is allocating. Every reason in this video is about the second type, the laziness that looks like a character flaw but functions like a cognitive advantage. 9 of them. Let's go. Before we get into the 9, one more thing. When most people think about laziness, they think about motivation, or willpower, or discipline. Those frameworks assume the problem is a deficit, something missing, something that needs to be added. But the 9 behaviors in this video aren't deficits. They are the outputs of a brain running a specific and rare set of cognitive processes. Not less, different. The world has been reading the output and misidentifying the process, seeing the speed and calling it slow, seeing the silence and calling it empty. 9 behaviors, 9 misreadings, 9 precise markers of a type of intelligence that runs quiet, runs deep, and almost never announces itself. Let's name them. Reason 1. The cognitive efficiency principle. The intelligent brain doesn't work like a machine. A machine can run at full capacity indefinitely. It does not care about the quality of output relative to input. It just processes. Your brain is not a machine. It is a biological organ with finite energy. It has evolved to be extraordinarily selective about where it spends that energy. Neurologist Marcus Reichel at Washington University discovered that the brain's resting state, the default mode network, consumes nearly as much energy as active, focused work. The brain never actually turns off. It is always processing. The question is what it is processing at any given moment. The efficient mind uses idle time not to escape, but to run background processes that cannot run during active task engagement. The lazy person who stares out the window for 20 minutes before answering a question isn't stuck. They are letting the answer fully form before they speak. Psychologists call this cognitive load management, the deliberate allocation of mental energy toward tasks that generate disproportionate returns. High IQ is not about working hard with your brain. It is about knowing which problems are worth the cognitive expense and refusing to spend premium mental energy on problems that don't. That is not laziness. That is resource optimization at the biological level. Reason 2. Systems thinking versus task thinking. Most people live in task mode. There is a thing to do, they do the thing. There is another thing to do, they do that thing, then another, one task after another, indefinitely. Efficient people live in systems mode. They are not thinking about the task in front of them, they are thinking about the system that produces the tasks. This looks like laziness because it looks like not doing things. They ask too many questions. They challenge the process. They seem less productive. Nobel economist Daniel Kahneman studied System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, reactive. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical. Most people, under social pressure to appear productive, default to System 1 even when the problem requires System 2. The lazy person refuses to perform that reflex. They sit with the problem longer. They seem less active. But when they do act, they act on the system, not just the task. And acting on the system produces results that persist, results that work without them. Results that compound. That is not laziness. That is the most productive kind of thinking there is.
Reason 3. Strategic procrastination. Procrastination has a bad reputation. In 2016, psychologist Adam Grant at Wharton published research on creative procrastination. People who delayed before completing a creative task intentionally consistently produce more original solutions. The reason is neurological. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. When you start a task and deliberately pause, your working memory keeps the unfinished problem open as a background process. Every piece of new information you encounter gets evaluated against the open task. Your brain is running a continuous parallel search for solutions without your conscious direction. The person who looks like they haven't started yet has actually been working on the problem the entire time, not visibly, computationally. A study at the University of North Carolina found that moderate procrastinators were significantly more creative than both high procrastinators and non-procrastinators. The optimal zone is the deliberate delay. Next time someone tells you to stop procrastinating, consider whether you're avoiding or whether your brain is doing something that looks like avoidance but functions like deep work. That is not laziness. That is your brain running its most creative background process. Reason 4. Path of least resistance equals elegant solution. Every domain of human knowledge has a word for the solution that achieves maximum results with minimum complexity. Physics calls it elegance. Mathematics calls it economy. Engineering calls it efficiency. The simplest solution that fully solves a problem is the most intelligent solution. This is not a preference, it is a principle. Every layer of unnecessary complexity adds a failure point. Every additional step adds friction. The person who insists on doing things the hard way is not working harder, they are thinking less. Warren Buffett describes his investment philosophy as the avoidance of complexity. Steve Jobs built an entire design language around the elimination of unnecessary elements. Blaise Pascal apologized for writing a long letter because he didn't have time to write a short one. Brevity is not the absence of thought, it is the product of it. The lazy person who says, "There has to be a simpler way to do this," is not avoiding work, they are pursuing the most advanced form of thinking available. That is not laziness. That is the pursuit of elegant intelligence. Reason 5. Not driven by boredom to action. Most people cannot sit with an idle mind. Research on interoception suggests that for most people, an unstimulated mind generates a specific and uncomfortable discomfort. Not anxiety, not boredom, something between. And the reflex is to fill it immediately with anything. A conversation, a task, a scroll. Anything that creates a sense of forward motion. The person with genuine cognitive depth doesn't have this problem. They have things to think about, problems running in the background, ideas that need connecting, questions still open.
A 2019 study at Harvard found that individuals scoring higher on intellectual curiosity were significantly more tolerant of uncertainty and mental stillness than their peers. They didn't need external stimulation to feel okay. Their internal world provided it. The lazy person at the party isn't uncomfortable. They are genuinely occupied by something no one else in the room can see. That is not antisocial. That is a mind that is never actually empty. Reason 6. Anti-hustle intelligence. Hustle culture has a premise. The premise is that effort correlates with output, that more hours produce more results. Economist John Pankovel at Stanford found that output per hour declined sharply after 49 hours per week. After 55 hours, output was functionally indistinguishable from not working at all. But the deeper problem with hustle culture is leverage. Low leverage thinking deploys maximum effort for linear returns. High leverage thinking deploys minimum effort for disproportionate returns. The person grinding 80 hours a week on execution is operating in low leverage. The person who spends 20 hours identifying which 20% of effort produces 80% of results, then doing only that, is operating in high leverage. Charlie Munger described his investment approach as doing almost nothing for long periods, then acting decisively when the right opportunity appeared. Most people watching saw laziness. They were watching a master of leverage. That is not laziness. That is high leverage intelligence. Reason 7. Emotional non-reactivity. There is a person in every room who just doesn't get triggered. Something frustrating happens. Everyone reacts. This person doesn't. Most people interpret this as not caring, as apathy, as indifference. Research from 2023 and 2025 confirms something important. Emotional non-reactivity is not apathy. It is one of the most cognitively demanding capabilities the brain can exercise. Being reactive is the brain's default state. The amygdala fires instantly. The response comes before the thought. Overriding that response requires the prefrontal cortex, seat of executive function and complex reasoning. The person who consistently doesn't react is not failing to care. They are running a faster, more sophisticated evaluation that concludes the reaction would not serve the outcome they're building toward. That is not laziness. That is active self-regulation at the highest level the brain can perform. Reason 8. The night owl pattern. The world runs on an industrial schedule. Schools start at 8 a.m., offices open at 9 a.m., and the person who doesn't fit this schedule gets a label. Researchers at the University of Madrid studied 1,000 adults by chronotype. Evening types consistently outperformed morning types on inductive reasoning, creative thinking, and complex analysis. After midnight, the social performance layer goes quiet, the part that monitors how you're perceived, the part that edits thoughts before they form. That layer is exhausting. The thinking that's been waiting all day to run without supervision finally runs. The most honest, most original version of your mind emerges. In 2024, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine acknowledged that evening chronotypes are not a behavioral choice. They are a genetic and neurological profile. That is not laziness. That is a cognitive rhythm that simply operates on a different schedule than the industrial world was designed for. Reason 9. The lazy geniuses of history. Let me give you a list. Charles Darwin spent 8 years studying barnacles instead of finishing his theory of evolution. His colleagues thought he was procrastinating. He was building the foundation of the most consequential scientific framework in human history. Albert Einstein described his method as patient thought, sitting with a problem for years without forcing resolution. His contemporaries saw someone who moved slowly. Winston Churchill spent 3 hours in bed every morning, took afternoon naps, and worked late into the night. His staff found him exhausting to keep up with, at different hours. Franz Kafka worked 3 hours a day and spent the rest in apparent idleness. He left behind some of the most psychologically complex literature ever written. All of them were called lazy at some point, every single one. And now, the quote I promised you at the beginning, from the person who built the most valuable company in human history. In 1996, a Microsoft intern asked Bill Gates about productivity. Gates thought about it, that specific quality of stillness he was famous for, rocking slightly, looking at nothing in particular, and then he said something that has been quoted in business literature ever since. "I will always choose a lazy person to do a difficult job, because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." He wasn't being ironic, he was describing a genuine hiring philosophy. The lazy person's refusal to do something the hard way, their search for the simpler solution, is exactly what produces the breakthrough. Not in spite of the laziness, because of it. If you recognize yourself in even 3 or 4 of those 9, I want to say something directly to you. You have probably spent years feeling like your relationship with effort was a problem, like you were somehow defective for needing more time. Nobody sat you down and said, your cognitive load management is a biological optimization strategy. Your procrastination is a background creative process. Nobody said, your systems thinking is the reason you seem slow to start but produce results that outlast everyone else's. Instead, you were told to work harder, move faster, just do it. And you tried. And it worked for tasks that didn't require thinking, and it consistently produced worse results for the ones that did. Because some problems cannot be forced. They can only be held, slowly, with patience, with the specific kind of intelligence that knows when to push and when to let the mind run its background process. That is not a character flaw. That is how the most capable minds in human history have always worked. The things you do alone, the ones you felt vaguely embarrassed about, the ones that made you wonder if something is off about the way you're wired, those behaviors are not flaws. They are a precise map of how your intelligence actually works. And it works in a way that most people and most workplaces have never learned to read. Before you go, one question. Which of those 9 made you think, that explains something about me I never had a name for? Drop the number in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone in your life has been made to feel guilty for being the laziest person in the room, send them this, not to prove a point, just to give them a map of what's actually happening inside them. If you want more psychology that explains your mind in ways nobody ever told you, subscribe. Every week, we go deeper. Your mind deserves to understand itself.